As I start speaking, you'll know. Marina, hello.
Your life.
Good morning. I am with a very, very special guest today, Dr. Emily Grossman. She is an internationally acclaimed science author. She is a public speaker. She is a TV personality. She's an expert in molecular biology and genetics. She's got a double first in natural sciences from Queen's College, Cambridge. And she's got a PhD in cancer research. She's also trained and worked as an actress. And she basically combines her skills as a science broadcaster, educator, writer, and trainer. Wow, Emily, that is an amazing, amazing list of accolades there. It's really, and you're so very, very young as well. What inspired you actually to go into science primarily?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the first thing I can remember really growing up is that my favorite word was why. I was always asking questions. I just remember I used to drive everyone completely bonkers. So my teachers and my parents, they were just constantly having to answer all of my questions. So I would never accept anything anyone told me. I was always like, well, why is the sky blue? Or why do flowers smell nice? Or why do I have to eat vegetables? Or whatever it was. It was just why? I never wanted to accept anything that I didn't understand really at a sort of very, very deep level. So for me, this wasn't science. This was a sort of natural curiosity about life and about the world. And that's something that I've retained through to today. And it's kind of how people know me is the one who's always asking questions and wanting to know more, wanting to understand more. But in terms of specifically science, my kind of, I guess my first inspiration was actually my dad. So my dad is a medical researcher, he's a doctor. And when I was really small, my parents got divorced when I was about sort of 4 or 5. So I didn't actually get to see my dad so often. But when I did see him, I really valued the quality time we had together. And we used to go on these long car journeys. And I remember he used to have what he called theory afternoons. Now, at the age of 5, I didn't know what a theory was. I just knew that we were going to have a fun afternoon and he was going to tell me lots of cool stories. And he was great at telling stories. And he would tell me, I remember one time he told me that we all used to be monkeys. And I'm like, that's really cool, you know? Like I used to be a monkey. He's like, well, not you exactly, but like thousands of millions of years ago, our great grandparents were monkeys. And I was like, that's amazing. And it took me till later on at school, of course, to learn that that was the theory of evolution. And then another time he said, if you were to travel really, really, really fast in a spaceship, then time would slow down. And I'm like, I want to do that. That's cool. Like, that's amazing. And it wasn't until many years later when I was studying physics at A level, actually, that I learned finally that that was the theory of relativity. And I was like, oh, it makes sense. But my favorite story, actually, that he told me was much more personal. It was the fact that he is colorblind. And I was really interested in this because, you know, he told me what it meant, and I thought it was fascinating that he couldn't see different colours, certain colours. And he said, "Well, you're not." And I thought, "Well, okay, I'm pretty different to you in many ways." But what he said, what really excited me was the fact that he said, "Your children one day, if you have them, might be." So I was really intrigued by the idea that there were these like little things inside of us somewhere, kind of hidden away inside my body that my dad had given me, and I was carrying them around. I didn't really do anything with them, but that I could give them to my children, and then they might sort of have them and show them. And of course, I learned much later on that what he was talking about, of course, were genes, and the theory was the theory of inheritance. And in fact, many years later, I then went on to specialize in my degree in natural sciences. I went on to specialize at the end in molecular biology and genetics and inheritance, and went on to do a PhD in cancer research, while I was using genetics on a daily basis and using genes and kind of a far cry from this sort of story aged 5, but very much inspired me to love everything that was about science and physics and biology and everything in between.
That is amazing. I mean, what a fantastic father, honestly, to sort of almost prep his child in these areas. And I mean, obviously, he must have recognized quite early on that you had that inclination towards science in order to be able to encourage you further. Is that is am I
Yeah, I
right in
think so.
assuming so? Yeah.
It's interesting. Again, I was thinking about this the other day. Another one of my earliest memories was I remember sitting on the stairs at the flat where I lived with my mum and dad. I guess before they separated, so I was really young. And I remember that it was my birthday, and I'd asked for my kind of favorite thing I could think of for my birthday and the thing I most wanted in the world. And I was sitting there on the steps, on the stairs, holding this in my hands, really excited. And it was a puzzle book. And all I wanted for birthdays and for Christmas was like logic problems and like number problems and puzzles. So I guess they must have known from a really young age that I was just a super, super geek. And I just loved kind of figuring stuff out and making sense of things, which was, made sense to my dad. But my mum is a creative. My mum is a writer, and she's a trainer, and she's a coach, and she's a creative herself. And she was always into sort of music and drama, which is the other side of what I loved. So I guess I was this sort of real hodgepodge of my dad's sort of intellectual, logic, rigor, sort of mathematical mind, and the sort of self-expressed creative soul and being that I kind of inherited from my mum, which very, very early on at school, I then started to realize that I did have this other passion as well as solving problems, this other passion for self-expression, for music, for dance, for performance, for sort of communicating, and for talking, for talking to
I
people.
love it. I love it. And you are a highly interesting person. I mean, you and I have sat down over dinner together, and
Yeah,
we've talked for hours. So you
yeah.
have such a huge body of experience and knowledge behind you that it's always, very exciting to sit with you, because you're always on the cutting edge of science. And I'm very fascinated by science, because obviously we have to mix our understanding of life with science as well, which is really important. Now, what I wanted to ask you specifically is, obviously, being in science is a predominantly male thing, in terms of what we see historically. So you're quite young, so obviously things might have been much more developed at the time that you were at school, but how did your how did your peer group actually sort of take you on board? The other girls, seeing you so interested in science more than the sort of typical girly things that young girls are supposed to be involved in.
Well, that's a very interesting question because I went to an all girls school. So for me, I don't think it was anything to do with the fact that I liked science as opposed to something more traditionally girly. But I think there was definitely a lot of antagonism towards me for the fact that I liked um, learning full stop. The fact that
Yes.
I really enjoyed my lessons. I really enjoyed being at school. And yes, as I've already alluded to, the fact, well, more than alluded to, I've blatantly stated the fact that I was always asking questions. And in that kind of slightly competitive environment, sort of certainly in senior school, there were a lot of girls who sort of were uncomfortable about the fact that I did well, that I wanted to do well, that I wanted to learn, that I paid attention in lessons, that I wasn't sort of maybe as rebellious as some of the others. And I did get bullied, and I did get kind of called a swot and a geek and a teacher's pet if I was asking questions and wanting to sort of understand deeper.
Mm.
And I found that very challenging. I mean, this is by no means sort of everyone. I have some great friends, but I did have some very challenging experiences, kind of settling around those kind of really difficult years between, I suppose, sort of 11 and 15 or 16, when everyone's kind of developing and growing and finding their selves and finding who their personalities are and who they want to sort of be in the world. And the fact that I was sort of keen and eager and excited about lessons, I guess particularly science, because whether it's a masculine male female thing or just simply something that it's just not very cool
Yeah.
to be good at. And one of the big things I do in the world now is that, I try to do anyway, is I do a lot of talks in schools. I do a lot of talks to young people at science festivals, and I try to change this sort of stereotype that science isn't cool and that you have to be a certain type of weird geeky person to be a scientist. And in fact, scientists are all sorts of different types of people, that you can have loads of different hobbies and interests, as I do, and that actually scientists are not just about solving problems and thinking analytically and being kind of quite single-minded in that way, but scientists are also about being sensitive and emotional and creative and working together as a team and solving problems in a much more sort of abstract way sometimes,
Mm.
and about sensitivity and caring deeply about the work that you do.
Yeah.
So it's
Beautiful.
been a tricky route for me from school, and I had several other tricky experiences along those lines during university and during my PhD.
Oh goodness, yeah. I mean, that's just the price of genius, I guess, is what I always say.
Well, about that.
Um, But
I think it's more about the process of this perception that sort of, especially growing up, that if you want to do well and you want to explore and understand the world, I don't think it's
yeah,
got much to do with genius. I think, yes, also there is a sort of antagonism towards people who are naturally gifted, and I was lucky that I was good at things, but it was more just also that I wanted to learn and I wanted to understand.
yeah, brilliant. That's wonderful. And a couple of things. What one is now obviously you're talking to children at schools or colleges or even universities. What are you finding in terms of the ratio of sort of women to men now moving more into science, and are you getting very good feedback from your talks?
Um, the ratio of men, I mean, so it's quite interesting. So, as a when I went to university, my intention was to study physics. You know, that was my intention as a university student,
Yeah.
and that was always the thing that I loved. That was the thing I was excited about. That was the thing that I was passionate about, and I've been, like I said, in an all-girl school, in an all-girl environment, and that was my predominant aim, was to carry on myself for the first time in an environment that was actually predominantly male. And this was kind of surprising and unusual and wasn't something that I was at all used to. Now, my first thought, of course, was, oh, you know, this is fun, there's boys around, and I thought, you know, I'm not going to be put off by this, and it's just a different environment. But actually, pretty quickly, I found myself really starting to lose my confidence. Now, at the time, I wasn't really aware of what was going on. I just thought, you know what, I'm just not good enough to carry on with physics. Maybe I've just come as far as I'm going to get in this subject. But I think what was really going on was that I found myself in this environment where it was very competitive. There was a lot of sort of like sink or swim attitude, sort of macho kind of camaraderie, kind of people laughing at each other if they got things wrong or made mistakes. And I started to feel that my kind of slightly more sensitive nature, and again, I want to preface this by the fact that I don't think this is a boy v girl issue. I think this is just a personality difference.
Yeah.
My personality, as you well know, girl, is that I need a lot of support and encouragement. I need to be able to ask questions. I need to be able to get things wrong and not get scared. And I get very easily upset and sensitive and emotional. That's just part of my personality. And I know there's a lot of men out there like that too. So this isn't just as a woman, but the environment that I was in was really not like that at all. And I very quickly thought, gosh, this just isn't for me. And I made it mean that what wasn't for me was physics rather than that particular environment I happened to find myself in.
Yeah.
And I very quickly dropped physics, decided to switch over to biology, where I just felt happier. But the irony being, which it's taken me, you know, nearly sort of 15 years to sort of work out what was going on, was that I still had to sit the physics exams, right? Because I still did the module of physics. And I came out sort of crying, thinking I'd got everything wrong. And the boys all came out laughing and joking, saying, oh, you know, gosh, you're so silly. Why did you write that? It was obviously 512, not 52. And I thought, oh, God, you know, I'm just a terrible failure. And thank God I've switched and I'm just not good enough to be a physicist. But when the results came out a few weeks later, I was completely shocked to discover that I actually did as well as, if not better, than most of the boys.
That's so
Now,
amazing.
and
Yeah.
at the time, I had not a clue what was going on. I just
Mm.
thought, oh, this is some weird glitch. I don't, and obviously, I'm still not cut out to be a physicist. But looking back, with the work that I now do with young people and the fact that I see young people experience this in mixed sex environments all the time,
Yes.
I now realize that what happened was that my perception of my abilities changed
Yeah.
because of the environment I was in, not because they were boys, but because they were a certain type of learning environment. And my actual abilities hadn't changed. And I see this all the time with young people that I teach, with young women who go into mixed sex environments or just different environments to what is safe and is comfortable for them. And they sit at the back of the class and they're too scared to put their hands up and ask questions in case they get it wrong or in case people laugh at them. And they mistakenly then go, you know what, I'm just not good enough to be a scientist, a physicist, a mathematician, whatever it might be. When actually, if you look at exam results, girls pretty much routinely actually outperform boys in maths and science subjects these days. But generally, there is this sort of feeling of like, you know, well, I'm good at science, I enjoy science, but it's just not for people like me. I'm just not, I don't quite fit into that world. I'm just not quite tough enough, strong enough. I'm a bit too
Yeah.
sensitive, a bit too creative, a bit too emotional, and I'm just not going to fit in. And this
Yes.
is something that I'm really, really hoping will change. And I'm working, and I know there's thousands of people across the country who are being great role models who are working to change this this attitude and this sort of stereotype that is really damaging to a lot of young people, particularly girls.
That's amazing. I mean, for you to be such a major contributor towards sort of changing, social conditioning in this way, and encouraging so many young people, because not only, you don't come across as a typical scientist. If you looked at you, I'd think you were much more of a TV personality. I mean, you're very glamorous, beautiful, and I wouldn't think you can be both, exactly. So I'm saying there's a really funny sort of stereotypical attitude that we all have, and we sort of
Exactly.
perceive scientists to be all geeky. But of course, you're a living example that you can be everything. You can just have it all, and use your brain in different ways, other than the things that normally we would associate with women, in terms of the way that we've been brought up or expected to perform, in particular arenas. But coming on to another subject, which I think is very key to your heart as well. I mean, talking about being sensitive as a person and
Mm,
emotional.
yeah,
I know that you recently, or you have been for a period of time, you've been doing a kind of a campaign which shows that men can cry too, and that it's important for them to cry and to show their emotions. And you've actually been sort of in national newspapers, and also on public or on national television, talking about this. Can you just give us a little bit of insight into A, what inspired you to do that, and B, what the actual message is, for men, with this kind of exposure that you're giving to this subject?
sure. So, what really the springboard for me to start speaking about this stuff was actually a pretty challenging experience that happened to me, which was that a couple of years ago, I went on a interview, well, actually a debate on Sky News about women in science,
Yeah,
and specifically about a comment that had been made by a Nobel Prize winning scientist in South Korea, at a conference in South Korea, Sir Tim Hunt, who had said, possibly as a joke, possibly seriously, it's not really clear, but either way, from my point of view, it sort of doesn't really matter, because what he is reported to have said is his trouble with girls in the lab is you fall in love with them, they fall in love with you, and when you criticize them, they cry. Now, it might have been said in a sort of light-hearted, jokey way, but I was asked to comment on this report on a debate on Sky News, and my sort of take on it was, well, some women cry, so what? I cry, and in fact, what we should be encouraging more men to cry, and any implication that people who cry, male or female, in this case female, in the lab are in any way less competent as scientists. Not that he directly said that. Now, I'm absolutely clear about that. But there is a sort of implication that some people might take a comment like that to mean that people who cry are sort of less welcome in the science lab. And in an environment where people like myself and other fantastic STEM role models and STEM ambassadors are desperately trying to support and encourage more young people to see a place for themselves in science where they may not have done before, then comments like, referring to women as crying, and maybe that's a problem potentially,
yeah.
are potentially damaging to an environment where we're trying to encourage more girls to actually enter science careers.
Mm.
So I made this comment on this Sky News debate. I had an opponent who um, was quite vehemently, strongly kind of against a lot of things that I was saying, or a lot of things that have been said in the world of women in STEM. And after the interview, I received a huge amount of sort of, I guess, trolling, abuse, attack
Mm.
online on Twitter and on various other social media platforms underneath the video on YouTube of the Sky News debate. And it really, really opened my eyes to the fact that there is a huge amount of antagonism out there towards, um, in the first instance, towards women in STEM, full stop, STEM being science, technology, engineering, mathematics. There were many, many comments that were attacking me individually, but more so that were attacking me as a representative of all women, basically saying that women weren't clever enough to be scientists, were stupid, were illogical, irrational, we should get back in the kitchen, that people who cry are sort of crybabies and we should stop whinging and whining, that sexism in the science world doesn't actually exist, that we're just making it up in order to sort of get over the fact that we're just not good enough and that we're just not doing as well as men, and that we should stop complaining and just toughen up and grow some balls and get on with it, or else sort of stay at home. And I found this incredibly disturbing and incredibly upsetting. But the sorts of comments that were a lot more subtle, that actually I thought, my God, there's actually something that needs to really be exposed here, that yes, of course, the obvious stuff, that of course women are clever enough to be scientists, and of course, women routinely outperform boys at school in science subjects. There's absolutely no reason why we couldn't be just as many of us in STEM careers, but in fact there aren't. I think recent reports show it's only just over 20% of women as science, technology, engineering, mathematical professions, which is still pretty low. But that actually, what the sorts of comments that I found disturbing on an even deeper level were people saying that there's no room for emotion in science, that these so-called touchy-feely qualities that I was mentioning in the interview about sensitivity and vulnerability and passion and compassion and collaboration and creativity, that these so-called touchy-feely qualities of women are of no importance in STEM and are not welcome in the science lab. And for me, this was just completely sort of a devastating kind of realization, to think that there is this stereotype out there that actually to be a scientist, you have to be cold and hard and unemotional, and that anybody who has sensitivity should sort of stay at home. And this touched a nerve on me personally, because actually over 10 years earlier, that stereotype was one of the reasons that I myself ended up leaving science as a researcher. I came back to it many years later as a science communicator. So I had myself realized that I had kind of come a cropper, fallen foul to this same stereotype that I had let make me believe that I wasn't cut out to be a scientist, which I now know is not true, because there are so many different ways to be a scientist, and there's so many different qualities that can be useful in science. So I decided that once I'd taken some time out, I really had to kind of recover from that experience, because it was the experience of the online abuse, and it was really incessant for a long period of time. And I've learned the importance of self-care. I've learned the importance of actually not just kind of soldiering on and saying, fighting fire with fire and being angry and tough, but actually to go away and to really reflect on what had happened to me, to heal, to get emotional support. And yes, I did a lot of crying around that time. And then to come back and say, right, what is it that I want to say? And what is it that I feel that I can hopefully make a tiny little bit of difference in this sort of debate or in this world? And I decided that I wanted to speak out. What I wanted to speak out about was to continue to support women in STEM, which was what I was already doing, but also to speak out about the value of emotion.
Yeah.
So I gave a talk at the Feminism in London conference, first of all, which there's a video of that on my YouTube channel, in which I basically show all of the tweets and all of the comments and all of the misogyny and all of the attack on emotion. And then I went on to give a TEDx talk at UCL, which was called Why Science Needs People Who Cry. And what I talk about in that, to come back to your question about the value of emotion in men, what I talk about is the fact that as a society, we have stigmatized a show of emotion. And in fact, the people that it most damages are not women, but men, because it's men who've kind of been socially conditioned, even more so than women, to not be able to cry, to not be able to show emotion, to not be able to talk about how that they're feeling. And that actually what that leads to in women, but particularly in men, is a bottling up of emotion, a stuffing down, a repressing, a holding, and it gets turned inwards as stress, as anxiety, as depression. Mental health experts say that this bottling up is one of the prime reasons why suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 40, because they've been conditioned not to show their feelings, not to express things, to hold it in, to turn it inwards as depression, or to let it come out in kind of unmanageable bouts of anger and aggression. There's a saying that bullets are unshed tears, and I think that is so true. Beautiful. And we only have to look at It's been in the news a lot recently about William and Harry, the princes, and about how when their mother, Princess Diana, died when they were very small, and they were internationally praised and acclaimed for their bravery at not crying, at not breaking down. They were really young little boys, and at their funeral, at her funeral, they walked down behind the coffin, and the news reporters even said, aren't they wonderful? Aren't they brave? They didn't cry. Look how strong they are. Look how stoic they are. And that this, is, I think, really represents as a society where we are with saying to young people, particularly boys, it's better not to. It's heroic not to. And both William and Harry have come out recently to say how much it has affected them and how much it has been difficult for them they're only just starting to be able to talk about it and to know that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be emotional and it's okay to be sad.
Absolutely.
And that actually makes us human and authentic. And in fact, what's interesting is that I've done some research into this, and that several kind of more than several centuries ago, before that, crying was actually a show of heroism. It was a show of strength and of power, particularly in men. If you look in the Bible, there's many references to men crying. If you go back to sort of Greek mythology, in Homer's Iliad, there's several references to the whole Greek army breaking down in floods of heroic tears because they lost a battle or because something kind of didn't work out for them. And it was a sign of strength and heroism. And there's references through all sorts of literature. You've got the Knights of the Round Table, you've got Lancelot crying because of his love for Guinevere or because he lost a battle. And this is a sign of manliness. And it's only in the last few centuries where actually things have massively changed. And it's turned into the fact that if we show emotion, and particularly if we cry, particularly if we're men, that we're weak, that we're pathetic, I don't know what it is, but it's completely damaging and it's very, very wrong. And in fact, if we look at the great leaders of today, people like Barack Obama, Winston Churchill, they were very known for being emotional. They were known for crying. Even if you look at Andy Murray, when he lost one of the Wimbledon championships and he broke down in tears, everybody got behind him. Everybody supported him because they saw that he was real, he was authentic, he was vulnerable. Same as Barack Obama at one of the gun rallies when he broke down in tears. It just shows us that these are real, strong, powerful human beings who are allowing themselves to be vulnerable. Absolutely. And I think that this is a really important thing in society. And I go on in my TEDx talk to talk about how not only does this make us an ability to express our emotions, helps us to be happier, stronger, more all-round human beings. Studies actually show that 9 out of 10 people feel better after a good cry. I know I definitely do. But it can bring value to the workplace as well. And I talk about this in terms of what I call 3 C's. And this applies in science and it applies everywhere in all professions. But the value of compassion, collaboration, and creativity. Beautiful. And how these 3 values they haven't traditionally been valued so much in the workplace, in science, in business, in politics, in finance, in any traditionally male-dominated environments. And in fact, how emotional sensitivity is crucial to allow us to care deeply about our work, to be compassionate, to be collaborative, to work with other people, and to be creative and to use our imaginations. And those qualities are as essential in all of these workplaces as they are in any aspect of life.
That's amazing, wonderful. You've expressed all of that so well. And it is interesting. We are going back, almost like reclaiming our humanness, aren't we? Where for many, many years now, or decades, we've been working on repressing things. Women repressing, their capabilities, men repressing their emotions. And now we're sort of learning from our ancestors, about a slightly more balanced way of being. Because even then, in those days, you had women who were, very acclaimed for some of the stuff that they did, and a lot of women were also dressing as men, weren't they?
Exactly.
To sort of hide what was going on.
And to succeed in the male world, you had to be more man. You had to be more like a man. And in fact, I've had newspaper columns written about me as an example of someone who's not being manly, and I should man up and grow some balls and toughen up. And actually, I think that whole expression, man up, grow some balls, is like, where are we being celebrated for what we can bring as women and what we can actually model and help men to bring in themselves and express the more sensitive and traditionally female type qualities that in fact are
Mm.
inherent in all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. The yin and the yang is in both of us. You know,
Yeah,
we've got to forget we're not just the sort of single genders. We also hold qualities. So as a male, you will be holding exactly the same qualities as a woman. I mean, the only
absolutely.
difference is obviously maybe physical strength, but that we, as we've seen, there's many amazing women bodybuilders out there
Yeah,
who are
exactly.
superseding men. So I mean, it's just something we've been conditioned over the years, and I think you're a very great living example of a woman who's managed to balance sort of both sides of the brain in terms of the what each hemisphere holds. You are a scientist, but you're also a very glamorous woman who is petite, very feminine looking, emotional, in touch with that side of herself. And just very very down to earth, and also a creative. Now, that's another thing we're going to come on to is actually your sort of acting side and TV presenting work and things, because you said that you followed a little bit in your mother's footsteps as well. But before we talk about that, it's come to my knowledge in the last sort of couple of weeks or so that you've just been awarded something absolutely amazing, and you're the second honorary STEM ambassador
Yeah,
ever
that's brilliant.
in the as a science communicator,
Mhm.
and apparently you were awarded this along with one of the astronauts. Do you want to just let us know a little bit about that? That's just so overwhelmingly amazing.
Yeah, well, it came as a real surprise to me as well, actually. I was so delighted. So basically, there is an organization called STEM Learning, and they hold every year the STEM Inspiration Awards, which are held at the House of Lords, actually, which was terribly exciting, which I got invited to go along to. And they started a scheme last year where well, no, sorry, they've had a scheme for a long time, which are called STEM ambassadors. So there are over 30,000 STEM ambassadors across the UK who are a variety of different people in STEM professions and STEM careers who give up their time to go into schools and to go into other organizations where young people go to talk to young people about STEM careers, about what it is to work in STEM, about what it is to be a scientist or an engineer or whatever area they work in. And these role models are just such phenomenal people who can really change the perception for young people of what STEM careers are, what it takes to be a scientist, and what it looks like, and that people like them can be happy and successful in jobs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now, just last year, STEM Learning decided that they would like people to act as sort of ambassadors of the ambassadors, sort of like
Mm.
representatives of these 30,000 amazing people who work across the UK. And last year, they asked Tim Peake, the astronaut Tim Peake, if he would be a representative of this fantastic scheme. And this year, they've asked me if I would be the secondary honorary STEM ambassador to work alongside Tim, well, not literally alongside him, but to be a sort of a flag, a sort of a what do you call a sort of uh, um,
Another honored
flagship sort
figure,
of role
yeah,
model,
flagship, yeah,
a figure, exactly,
yeah.
a public figure to sort of represent the people on this scheme. So both myself and Tim Peake, we sort of stand as champions for the importance of STEM education and for the importance of role models in helping and supporting young people to fulfill their potential and to go into STEM careers if it's something that they're drawn to do and they feel passionate and excited about exploring the world and finding out about the world and about showing them that they can be happy and successful in STEM careers.
That is
So,
so
yeah.
phenomenal. Honestly, Emily, I'm really blown away by that. That's just absolutely amazing. I mean, you're such a good role model for younger women out there, in everything that you do. And not just that, obviously showing young women who would like to do creative things as well as scientific things. I mean, you're a prime embodiment of that. What sort of acting work have you done? Because you sometimes hear people say, well, I'm a scientist, but I like to do a bit of the creative stuff, etc. But often it's sort of almost amateurish. But you've excelled on every level. I mean, the work you've done is very um, professional, and it's been out there in a larger public eye, than maybe just local sort of repertory theatre. Can you just maybe elucidate a little bit about some of the
Yeah, of
stuff
course.
you've done?
So first of all, just to be clear, and I've mentioned this before, but
Yeah,
just to sort of dispel any stereotypes, that science itself is a hugely creative profession.
yeah.
And I think that's part of the issue, is that it's not seen as a creative profession. So it's seen that you either have to kind of be one or the other. So
I
I
should have
just
said the
want to,
arts. Yeah, apologise.
yes,
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
no, but I think it's an important point to make
yeah.
anyway, that, you only have to look at people like Einstein, who basically said,
Mm,
imagination is more important than knowledge. That
yeah,
sometimes he said he sometimes believed he was right, or felt that he was right about something before he actually
yes.
knew he was. But that aside, absolutely there is creativity in STEM. But that aside, yes, in terms of the arts, I have always had this sort of passion for self-expression and for playing roles, playing characters, for expressing myself through writing, through playing characters in theatre, and also through music, whether it's singing or whether it's dance. And for me, that's just a sort of it's what lights me up. It's what excites me, is a kind of uh, expressing myself in a way that I can touch or move or inspire an audience, whether that's live theatre, which is actually my real passion, or whether that's through playing a role in a play or in a musical, whether it's through singing a song in a band, or whether that's these days more so through giving a talk at a school, at a festival, or at a university about science, about inspiring people about science topics, helping people make sense of things, or about sharing myself and my challenges and my story in a way that will resonate with people. And for me, that's all part of the same thing. It's all part of kind of sharing myself authentically to an
Yeah.
audience, such that it will touch, move, or inspire others.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And
I just realised we're sort of slightly running out of time here. So, I mean, it's just fascinating. Like I said, when I sit with you for dinner, you can talk for hours and hours. You've got so much information there.
I just
But
can I just quickly
mm,
just add in one thing.
yeah,
So, fascinating study which just showed
yeah,
that a large proportion of Nobel Prize winning scientists have creative hobbies in the arts, and I think that's a fascinating insight into the fact that there it is possible, more than possible, to have
yes.
sort of different parts, and in fact that actually often leads to genius and strokes of real life changing moving forwards in the world.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks for sharing that with us. So, as we sort of prepare to kind of wrap within the next several minutes, I do want to ask you a couple more questions. One is the media outlets. I mean, just let our hearers, or I would say our listeners, know about which kind of media avenues you've been interviewed in, so they get an indication they can look out for you.
Okay, sure. So the I suppose what I'm best known for in the kind of TV world is I do a show on Sky One, which is called Duck Quacks Don't Echo, and it's a celebrity panel show. It's hosted by the phenomenally hilarious and intelligent and brilliant comedian Lee Mack, and he's really into science. And basically, each week he has a panel of celebrity guests who come on and talk about their favorite weird science facts. And then there's a panel of experts who are myself and two other fantastic scientists, Simon Foster and Maggie Adair Pocock, who we basically validate and verify the facts and explain the facts in a sort of to a lay public audience in ways that are sort of fun and engaging and hopefully kind of educational, but also sort of inspire and engage those at home and in the live studio audience. So we do this show. We've filmed 6 series now, which is fantastic. It's just run and run and run, and they're constantly being shown on Sky One, and on a lot
Yeah.
of the other cable channels that are sort of repeat these episodes. I also did a season as the resident science expert on the Alan Titchmarsh show. That was a couple of years ago now, where I was basically explaining each week, explaining the science behind household objects, like how the humble toaster works and how the Hoovers work and how microwaves work. And I was also talking about science headlines, whatever's in the news this week, and answering questions that viewers had called in with or emailed in with. And then I pop up every now and again on the odd sort of one-off news program. Sometimes I'm on Sky News talking about anything from the odds of winning the national lottery to how to encourage more young women to enter STEM careers, or why maths is so exciting. And I'm often asked to sort of do radio interviews and sometimes go on. And something actually that I've been talking about more and more, and I may well be doing more media interviews about, is fertility and
Mm.
my journey into egg freezing my eggs.
Exactly. That's in fact one of the last questions I was going to ask you. I mean, there was a very big article recently in one of the national papers about you freezing your eggs, and
Yeah.
I mean, the article was brilliantly sort of informative in terms of the reasons why you do it, because you obviously want to freeze them for the future, having not found a suitable partner yet that you want to settle down with and have children. You feel that time is moving on. But
Mhm.
what I also know from having chatted with you recently is it's not an easy process. A little bit like having IV treatment, IVF treatment. You have to have a lot of hormones pumped into you and lots of other things. How did you manage to hold all that down and do all your work at the same time?
It's a very good question. I mean, just to clarify, as you say, it is exactly the same as IVF treatment, except that there's basically a pause in the middle, where instead
Yeah.
of taking your eggs and putting them in a test tube and sticking them together with some sperm, you stick them in the freezer. So yes, I had to go through. I've done 3 cycles of it, and each time I had to go through 2 weeks of daily injections to stimulate my ovaries to release more eggs than the usual one each cycle. And then I
Yeah.
had to have a short procedure to have the eggs taken out of my body and then put in the freezer. Now, women's response to the hormones varies massively. I was actually quite lucky that my response to the hormones was actually quite positive. I felt mostly quite happy and quite relaxed. I certainly felt more tired than usual, and there were certainly times when I felt bloated or uncomfortable, particularly after the procedure itself. Um, but I'm lucky as a freelancer that I was able to sort of not to take things easy, but certainly to take things easier. That I often work from home, so I was doing a lot of more work from home during that period of time, and I had a lot of support from my friends and my family who kind of just gave me sort of literal support, but also a lot of emotional support, kind of keeping me really positive and excited about the whole experience. And the
Yeah.
overriding feeling for me, to be honest, was just excitement and relief to be doing something so positive, to be doing something so empowering, to be taking control of my fertility, which is something that had been really, really making me worried and anxious since I sort of hit my mid-30s. And
Yeah.
having done a lot of research into the facts and figures and the success rates, I was really convinced, and I remain really convinced, that this is a really useful and important thing for women. Yes, it's expensive. So women who can afford to do this, ideally, from the age of mid-30s onwards, ideally as soon as possible once you get to that mid-30s age. If you can afford to do it, I just think it's such an important thing to consider doing. Success rates for egg freezing are pretty much identical to that for IVF using fresh eggs, and IVF is, of course, supported and encouraged for those women or families, couples who are finding it hard to have children. So in which case, why not, if you're in your mid-30s or above, ideally closer to mid-30s than late 30s, which is where I'm getting now, then I really would support and encourage young women to look into this and to go ahead with it if it's something they feel comfortable doing. And
Yeah.
if they do feel that they want to have children at a later date, then, and they're not in a position to do that now for whatever reason,
Mm.
then I think it's something that's a really valuable and amazing advance into the medical science that we can do this now.
Definitely. I mean, goodness, you are so at the cutting edge of everything, Emily. I mean, it can be quite overwhelming for people, listening to all the things that you've been doing and involved with, and you're quite a sort of you're quite a leader. You're very proactive in creating new paradigms of thinking.
I am, but I also
And
have many days. I just want to stress I have
mm,
many days where I just don't want to get out of bed and I just think, you know what, I'm just not good enough. I don't know how I'm going to do this. Imposter syndrome in spades. At any moment, someone's going to turn around, tap me on the shoulder, and go, "Really? What are you doing? What are you doing here? You don't know what you're doing. You're not good enough. Go back to bed." And I, along with the rest of everybody, I have days when I just don't feel like I can do it. And I
sure.
really value self-care, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, work-life balance. I burnt out in my early 30s. I had a sort of breakdown, and
Yeah.
it really taught me that the key to, for me, the key to success is to have a really balanced life, is to value every part of myself and not to work too hard. And yes, I've done some fantastic things, but I work, in a way, I work less hard than I used to. But what I do therefore is hopefully more in line with my purpose and what it is that I want to be doing in the world.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you are human at the end of the day, and you are going to experience things like that. But I mean, you're generally a very, very accomplished woman, and you do sort of, I think you supersede your own bars, don't you? You kind of push yourself to max, which is is wonderfully inspiring to people, especially to young people.
Well, my
And
motto is say yes, panic later.
I love it. I love it, which is great, isn't it? So like a real can-do attitude. Um, one, I just want to let you know one thing before I ask you the final question, or maybe well, I should reverse it. Let me ask you the final question first before I spring a little surprise on you. Are there any other aspirations that you have, Emily, that you'd like to sort of, fulfill alongside everything else that you're doing that may be a bit different?
Um, well, as I've sort of indicated, I'd like to have a family, and that's a very
Yeah,
important part. And I'd like to be able to continue my career alongside having a family in whatever way that might look.
yeah,
And I'd like to be able to bring a family and being a mum into the work that I do, and to use
yes.
that to inform the way that I am as a human being and the way that I do my work, and who I can be as a role model. I'm writing a book, which is sort of my passion piece, my baby, so to speak, at the moment,
Mhm.
for kids, which is well, it's actually really for kids and parents, but it's sort of ostensibly for kids. Sort of a guilty pleasure for parents to read as well, which is a
Yeah.
book on kind of weird science facts, and it's a kind of quiz book on weird science facts and their explanations, as a sort of science by stealth way of explaining some important science concepts about the world through the medium of
Wonderful.
wee and poo and fun things about science.
I want a
So
copy.
my sort of my ambition is to finish that, to get that
Yeah,
done and get that. It's good. I've got a publishing deal on it, so that should hopefully be on the shelves in 2018, I believe, hopefully.
yeah.
And just to continue really to say yes to opportunities, but also to really say yes to things that feel in line with the values that I hold and the things that I want to do, and to continue to go into to schools and to meet young people and to go into universities and to speak on increasingly, hopefully, more public platforms about the things that are important to me.
Mhm. That's superb. Thank you so much, Emily. I mean, it's been really an honor having you on the show, and I'm going to listen to this interview again once it's up on air because there's going to be things in there I might have missed as well. And I'm definitely going
Thank
to
you.
invite you back so we can talk in detail on some of those subjects and, spend the whole time maybe, looking in detail at one or two things as opposed to an overview because there's so much to fit in an hour almost we've done instead of half an hour, which of course we had to let it roll. But one thing I do want to say before we end is that we're on Radio Works, as you know, which is a platform that has been founded by Marina Nani, and she has a very special awards ceremony that she does once a year. The last year it was at BAFTA, and this year I think it's at the Royal Horse Guards Hotel. And I've literally just had news that you've been nominated for an award at the
Oh, wow.
Stardust Awards. Literally now, it's sort of come through on my other device just to kind of let you know. So that's going to be on
Oh
the
my God, so
18th of
exciting.
November. So you've been nominated, and you'll be obviously sent information about that. But I thought it'd be great to say it on air.
Wow, that's so exciting. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted. What a privilege. What an honor.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to seeing you there, and Emily, in the meantime, keep on doing the amazing work that you're doing, and just be you, because obviously what you've shown us all is that it's not about necessarily aspiring to be a scientist or an actress. It's really just acknowledging all the gifts that we have, and taking an almost Da Vincian approach to it, isn't it? I mean, look at Da Vinci. He was an artist and a scientist and everything, and I think that these days we're recognizing more and more that in order to have a very full life exploring our maximum potential, we have to be open to looking at different aspects of ourselves and developing those, because creativity, as you rightly said, it's not just limited to the arts. Science is creative too. It's the whole process of discovering and sharing and thinking outside the box in order for some of these sort of theories to emerge in the first place. So you're doing an absolutely stellar job, and I'm very proud of you myself.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and have a superb week, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and brilliance with
Well,
us.
thank you for having me on the show. It's been really lovely to speak to you, and it's been a wonderful experience for me to get to sort of share myself in this way and to feel that it's okay. I spent so much of my life not fitting in and feeling like I was a bit weird and a bit different and never really found my place in the world. So I'm quite moved and touched by being able to share with you in this way and being received in this way and being nominated for an award is just so wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, bless you. Well, well done. And have a lovely week and we'll talk again. I will invite you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye, Emily.
Bye.